Lobster dealer is sort of an all-encompassing term that applies to any type of business that would occupy a position in moving lobsters into the supply chain. One of the things that we're really excited about is showing people where these operations are located and how important they are to these coastal economies. Lobster dealers deal with moving lobster through the supply chain. So effectively, we represent that part of the industry that would get a lobster from, say, Stonington, Maine to Shanghai or San Francisco. Aggregation and dispersal of the product is really what we do, and we add value to it by processing it into product forms that are useful for food service or for restaurant sectors. Lobster dealers and processors are located throughout the entire state of Maine. The greatest concentration is certainly along the coast, but you can definitely see an impact of this industry all throughout Maine. When you're landing thousands of pounds of lobster in the peak of the season, you're not also going to be the person that grades it and finds market for it and sells it to your customers all around the world. Once you take that lobster out of the water in your facility and put it into a box to ship it anywhere in the world, the clock starts ticking on that animal, and it needs to be alive when your customer receives it in order for them to be able to sell it safely to their customers. People don't know what we do, largely because you don't see us. Like, these businesses are really hidden in warehouses or at the end of peninsulas, and people will have seen tidal pounds, but they've probably never been into a tank house that holds hundreds of thousands of pounds of lobster. They probably have never seen a lobster processing facility and understood really how incredible that investment is. The reality is that this industry is very dynamic, and it's not just lobster fishermen on the water, it's the guys that are working at the docks, it's the people that are on the floor of lobster processing facilities picking lobster meat and making sure that the quality of the product is top-notch. It's the guys that are packing lobsters around the clock on Christmas Day. These facilities very often never close. You've got a lot of businesses that are operating 24/7. And it's not just the lobster businesses themselves, but also the ancillary businesses that support your ability to move these products around the world. So your truck drivers, packaging companies, water companies to fill your lobster tanks. I mean, the impact is massive. Fuel, food, I mean, it's everything. And that dependence on the lobster industry and the lobster businesses only becomes more important and more dependent the more rural you are in the state of Maine.
Being a lobster dealer in Maine is challenging because you're dealing with, first and foremost, Mother Nature. So you're subject to the elements. And then the supply, which you're always trying to project or figure out ahead of time, is an unknown. Lobster dealers is just another seat in the boat, but it's one boat, this industry. Harvesters are in there, dealers are in there, vendors, suppliers, people that are direct to the product, but also people that are non-direct to the product. And we all sink or swim together. When we're doing well, everybody else is doing well. If we're not doing well, probably other people aren't doing well. But it's one boat. It's not separate boats.
The lobster industry in Maine is a multi-billion-dollar industry, employing thousands of people throughout the state. Like furniture or electronics, the supply chain for lobsters is virtually invisible to the customer. And it's a complicated process getting that lobster to market. And it's the dealers and the processors that do that. What makes this study different from other economic impact studies is the participation by the dealers. They provided their spending patterns, their stories about the economic footprint they have in their communities, because they wanted it to be as accurate as possible. So I've got much more detail on their spending patterns. I've got much better sense for how to trace the economic footprint of these lobsters to the dollars that are being generated in the state economy. And so what I did to focus on the dealers and processors was to put together a worksheet of data, and literally spent months traveling up and down the coast of Maine, from Kittery to Eastport, getting to know the dealers, listening to their story, and asking them essentially to enumerate for me their expenses for 2016. Now, these are expenses across a lot of different categories. We may be talking about crates and boxes for shipping. We may be talking about seaweed and bait. We may be talking about fuel expenses. Each one of these is going to have a separate impact in the local community. That impact's called a multiplier. Any money they spend multiplies throughout the economy. They're also paying wages to workers, and they're paying salaries to their managers. This income also has a separate multiplicative effect on the economy. I want to measure that economic impact, aggregate it up, and ask, what's the value of this supply chain to Maine? And we're talking about an economic footprint that's about $1 billion for the Maine economy. The other story that isn't told very much is the labor story, the people they employ. And these people come from all walks of life. It's a really important story for the state economy and for regulators and policymakers to know that they're employing people that nobody else will. They're offering a different type of work experience for the people of Maine. And so you can do really well in this industry with very little prior experience. And they generate lots and lots of income for the state economy.
We've seen an incredible rise in the supply of lobster in the state. Fishermen have done very, very well in the last several years, have responsibly harvested millions of pounds of lobster, hundreds of millions of pounds of lobster. So as that supply increase has happened, we have had to go out and find new markets for those products. People know that we've been selling into Europe for a long time. That's only grown in the last 10, 15 years. The thing that people always point to is the expansion in China. But it's not just China for Asia, it's South Korea, it's Vietnam, Taiwan, Singapore, and there's growth everywhere where you see a strong economy. We're really excited to tell our story and educate people in Maine about the strength and success of what a Maine lobster dealer or processor does.